Hi, we're back again with Maranatha Minutes, Dr. Jane and Dr. John Pendleton, and we're going to read chapter 4 and study it tonight.
In Genesis.
In Genesis.
Yeah. So we want to welcome everybody back to the show, and we're glad to have you. So tonight's discussion again is on Genesis chapter 4, and we're studying Cain and Abel and Eve having, this is the first family. So it's an exciting night. Mm-hmm. And we're leading up to, you can see behind us, we have the Christmas tree up. And we're leading up to, of course, the line of Christ, the bloodline of Christ. So, so we're going to go ahead and start reading. Go ahead and open your Bibles and follow along with us. Again, this is Genesis chapter 4. Then Adam had sexual intercourse with Eve, his wife. And she conceived and gave birth to a son. Cain, meaning I have created one, in the image of her husband. For as she said, with God's help, I have created a man. Her next child was his brother, Abel. Through God, she too created a man. Yes. She created a child. The firstborn child, there was nobody there to guide her through her childbirth or to help her. Other than, the animals experiencing it and then watching the animals, humans had not yet given birth. This had to be a very scary experience, but I'm sure God prepared her for it in some way. Knowing she was the first, I'm sure He had prepared her in some way, or prepared her husband to help her in some way, because the babies we know lived yes. for a while anyway. But so then we move on. Then she had Abel, which was Cain's brother, and she was feeling very blessed at this point. As a mother, that feeling as a parent. So Abel became a shepherd, while Cain was a farmer. He toiled in the land. Now we already know that God made it difficult for the land to grow. So they were going to toil, and they had droughts and things now. Working the land was not easy, so Cain had a hard job. At harvest time, Cain brought the Lord a gift from his farm produce. And Abel brought the fatty cuts of meat from his best lambs and presented them to the Lord. And the Lord accepted Abel's offering, but not Cain's. This made Cain both dejected, by God, and very angry. And his face grew dark with fury. Why are you angry? The Lord asked him. Why is your face so dark with rage? It can be bright with joy if you will do what you should. What God asked him to do. But how some people, how some teens and older boys can be, girls too, a bit. Teenagers, they can be disobedient. They can be unruly. So we don't know exactly how old Cain was, but he was old enough to work the land. And he was old enough to know better. So again, he says, why is your face so dark with rage? It can be bright with joy if you will do what you should. But if you refuse to obey, watch out. Sin is waiting to attack you, longing to destroy you. He was talking about Satan. Okay, Genesis 8. One day, Cain suggested to his brother, let's go out into the fields. And while they were together there, Cain attacked and killed his brother. So now we have the very first murder in the Bible, the first family, and not even just one generation into it, and somebody's already killed somebody. Now, do you think this pleased God? But afterwards, the Lord asked Cain, where is your brother? Where is Abel? How should I know? Cain retorted. Am I supposed to keep a track of him wherever he goes? But the Lord said, your brother's blood calls to me from the ground. Now, can you imagine that? His blood was calling to God from the ground that it was seeping into. So the ground was literally crying out for the Lord, the creation. So God knew what happened. What have you done? Well, Cain probably didn't want to say too much on that, and he probably denied it, and But God speaks again to him in Genesis 4:11, and he says, "You are hereby banished from the ground which you have defiled with your brother's blood. No longer will it yield crops for you, even if you toil on it forever. From now on, you will be a fugitive and a tramp upon the earth, wandering from place to place." You know, and when I read this, the first thing I asked myself was, does that mean Cain is still alive? Because he says, even if you have to do it forever. And then he said he wouldn't banish him, he could never go back into the earth. So, of course, you want to read forward at that point. And then in Genesis 4:13, Cain replied to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. For you have banished me from the farm and from you, and made me a fugitive and a tramp. And everyone who sees me will try to kill me, because he stands against God." The Lord replied, "They won't kill you, for I will give 7 times your punishment to anyone who does." Then the Lord put an identifying mark on Cain as a warning not to kill him. So Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Well, we know that Adam was removed out of the Garden of Eden. But Eden was probably much bigger than just a garden. It was probably a very big area. And so God sent him out, and he settled in the land of Nod. Then Cain's wife conceived. Now, that's another question that we have from Louise from Ohio writes, did Cain and Abel marry their sisters? And how did that work? Okay, well, we're going to answer that here in just a minute, Louise, so hang on. This is Louise from Ohio. Hold on. In Genesis 4:17, then Cain's wife conceived and presented him with a baby son named Enoch. So when Cain founded a city, he named it Enoch after his son. All right, so now to answer your question, Louise, they would have had probably some older or younger sisters, or maybe some sisters between Cain and Abel. And you're
yes,
thinking,
the 130 years is the time frame. So there's 130 years from Adam's first child and Seth. So you've got 130 years going on. So you've got other children. The main players are mentioned. Cain is a main player. Abel is a main player.
yes.
And the issue that happens here is that Cain attacks his brother, kills him, and then proceeds to tell God that he doesn't deserve to be punished. God says he's going to make him wonder. So he starts posing
Like he's a god.
Yeah, I'm going to do what I please, and I'm going to do where I
He
please.
probably was feeling that he's already been punished. What more can God do to me? I'm going to wander the earth forever, never be dyed, go into the ground. I can never be buried into holy ground. Right now they considered the earth holy ground. Okay, so we hope that, Louise, we hope that answers your question. But they would have married, there was one generation, because remember, their genealogy was pure.
There's 130 years, and the genetic aspects of man were as near perfect as you can get.
Yeah. So one generation would have been Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and it would have been them having intercourse and children with their own sisters. It's not really that confusing. I mean, they would have had to have had sex with their sisters, yes.
Yes.
Sorry to say it, but yes. But that's what God had intended at that time. It's not right now, because we're not pure like that. We're not, inbreeding and incest causes problems.
It's a different family relationship, and it's 130 years of how often do you keep track of your family?
Well, even after the flood.
130 years of people.
Yeah. Well, even after the flood, you have Noah, and Noah's sons had wives, so they brought in new blood, new family lines. Because when they bred with them, they were actually breeding with each other after that as well. But you're also talking from living from hundreds of years down to a maximum of 120 years. So God, during that flood time, and we'll get to the flood thing there in just a minute, because I know I've got a lot of questions coming in about the flood. But let's cover this part first.
130 years, there's a lot going on, and I had much choice. He was a very bully sort of person.
But you think that Adam and Eve would have had a say in it? I mean, you give them away, but back then they probably didn't have. They did obviously have marriages.
We're free agents in a free world. That means we're free to do good, or we can do evil. If we do evil, then there's consequences to that. If we do good, just like God said to Cain, if you do good, you can be happy. Raise up your head and be happy. Do the right thing. But Cain decided, I'm going to kill my brother because he's in my way.
Okay, so in Genesis 4:18, Enoch was the father of Irad. Irad was the father of Mehujael. Mehujael was the father of Methuselah.
Methuselah.
I never can say that right. Methuselah was the father of Lamech. In Genesis 6:19, Lamech married two wives, Adah and Zillah. To Adah was born a baby named Jabal. He became the first of the cattlemen and those living in tents. His brother's name was Jubal, the first musician and the first inventor of the harp and of the flute. So that's how long the harp and the flute has been around. That answers that question. To Lamech's other wife Zillah was born Tubal-Cain. He opened the first foundry, forging instruments of bronze and iron. So when they talk about the Iron and Bronze Age, we probably need to get the archaeological Bible out here in just a minute, because they're already mentioning that he started the Bronze and Iron Age during his time.
Well, the flood.
The forging
the flood would have wiped out a
tools.
lot of the documentation of that. So they were definitely progressing in the knowledge of how to use metals.
Yes, he was figuring it out. He was a founder. So in Genesis 6:23, one day Lamech said to Adah and Zillah, "Listen to me, my wives. I have killed a youth who attacked and wounded me. If anyone who kills Cain will be punished 7 times, anyone taking revenge against me for killing that youth should be punished 77 times." I mean, he felt that he had the right. It's like in a court of law. I mean, it was the land of the law of the land, I should say, at this point now. And it was to each his own. The sin was starting to be a little bit more rampant now. He was attacked by another tribe's child, by a young boy, and he had to protect himself because, I mean, he was probably feeding his family at this point, and they needed him for farming or whatever. So later on, Eve gave birth to another son and named him Seth, meaning granted. So let's talk about Eve for a minute. How do you think she felt losing? She lost 2 sons that day. Cain was banished and Abel was dead. So she was without her 2 sons. She probably had, of course, daughters. We know she had daughters because Cain and Abel would have married them. How many, we don't know. But can you imagine trying to toil the land with daughters and no sons? And missing your sons, and God had made a promise that Christ was coming through the line of Eve, and then she lost both of her sons, so the idea of that was kind of fading.
There's 130 years, though. You have to keep in mind the time frame. 130 years between
babies giving birth.
Of babies, of giving birth.
So Seth was born when Adam was 130.
Yes, Seth was born when Adam was 130. And then the remainder of the things happened in the 930 years that Adam was alive.
Yes.
So you've got 1,000 years of history here. And we're 2,000 years past the birth of Christ.
Yeah.
And you've got 1,000 years of history.
Look what we've done to the United States in the few hundred years we've been here. I mean, we totally populated it. So can you imagine in 130 years in Eden? It was populated. I mean, just look at what we've done here or in other countries in so much amount of time, and then put that back then. And to see somebody live hundreds and hundreds of years, they would have acquired quite much land, property. I mean, there was no land title deeds. You just went and settled on it and kind of fought for it.
Yes.
You kind of conquered it. And that's what sin brought us to, really. Went from easy to being really hard. So after Eve gave birth to Seth, God had granted her another son, the one that Cain had killed. You know, he was a replacement for the one that Cain had killed. Replaced Abel, she felt. When Seth grew up, he had a son and named him Enosh. Remember, Cain had Enoch and named the city Enoch. But Seth had a son named Enosh. It was during his lifetime that men first began to call themselves the Lord's people, or Christians.
And that would have been 235 years, a span of time.
Yes.
How long have we been a nation? 1776.
A long time.
A lot can happen, you know, within a few hundred years, and so you have to keep in mind the time frame. There's 130 years of procreative activity between Adam and Eve. There's also another 105 years when Seth procreates and different things happen. There's 930-year history of Adam in and of itself. So all this is happening in the span of 1,000 years.
A long time.
A long time. So you've got the interplay of the original Adam and Eve, their descendants, and then them marrying one another. Now, was incest promoted between parent and child? No.
No, not in the beginning, because then the bloodline thinned out. And look. I mean, if you went, let's say your last name was Donaldson, and then you met somebody named Harrelson, and you both were from Scotland, and you came over here together. But you found out you had distant cousins that were related. You could still get married because that's fine, because you're really, I mean, the bloodline's so thin, it's okay. That's why there's laws that you can't marry your first cousin, but you can marry your second cousin. Because the reason why you can't do it is because today, in the bloodlines, if you procreate with someone too close to you, you start having children with deformities and with problems and things. And that's one of the reasons why it's illegal. Another reason is because God did not intend it. And our laws are based on the Bible. I studied law. I can tell you our laws are based on the Bible.
Yes. The Old Testament law, incest between a father and a daughter was never permitted.
No.
It was meant that a man have one wife and that a woman have one husband in the ideal sense.
That's right. That's right. And whenever they did something outside of that, it was considered a perversion. And God will say it here in just a few minutes as well. So I had, for this last person that asked me, it's just an anonymous, they didn't give me their name, from the good state of Washington. And they wanted to know, they were asking John this, how do you feel that Cain felt when he was disrespecting God? And I think that he was lazy and disrespectful. And I think he did what he did out of jealousy, disrespect, and he didn't offer him the best fruit. You know, here Abel was offering him something better. God didn't accept it. And yeah, God was mad at him for the way he was behaving. He was behaving spoiled, disrespectful, and he probably was disrespecting his parents as well as God. He's probably very rebellious, would be the best word I can think of.
I think he was being disrespectful. I think that high-handed and arrogant and disrespectful. And the children that he raised, if you look at what happened to his line, the preceding sin that started accumulating in his line in reference to more than one wife and perversions with demons and other different things.
Oh, yeah.
You've got worship of other things other than God, and you've got a total perversion. And finally, God says it grieved him in his heart. And here, when you see what God said in reference to Abel's blood cries from the ground.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. The feeling of that.
The
because
feeling
it did.
That it hurt. And here the ground itself
was hurt.
Cried out that you had done this evil. We are free agents in the world. We can do good and evil, but there are consequences of that. People get hurt. We hurt ourselves. And
this also tells us that the creation itself has feelings, that the Holy Spirit that helped create this, and Jesus and God and the Trinity And when they created the earth, they put feelings into these things. The animals, the water, the earth, it has feelings.
Trees can communicate.
They do. They prove they do communicate with each other. You know,
Plants, you can have a healthy plant.
well, you know, when you have one olive tree, you can have thousands because, and if the one olive tree that starts it dies, you can lose the entire crop of olive trees. They are connected, and they do communicate with each other.
There's an interplay within creation, and there is creative force within creation.
It works that way in my greenhouse. If there's one sick flower in my greenhouse, I have to remove it, or it can make all the flowers sick. So they do like kinds. We're talking about like kinds again. They do affect one another, and they do communicate with one another.
And they can spread disease, or they can hopefully cheer one another up.
And everything's based around the sun and the moon as well. Your plants sleep at night too, and then they let off photosynthesis and stuff. I mean, you've got all these things that these plants do that has to do with the sun. So, you know, I mean, you can walk into just a greenhouse and see the miracle of Christ.
It's amazing, you know,
watching it come up from the seed and grow up, and then you pull out all the weeds, and so I mean, Adam and Eve might have done a bad thing, but to be honest with you, I like working the soil, and I like trying to make things grow. That's why I have a greenhouse. So if you find the joy in it, and you find the forgiveness in your life, and you find the joy in it, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, if you're angry, somehow get over it. Have God help you to do that,
because that's what He wants.
And see the goodness that you can do for people and for yourself. And if you choose to do evil, then just know that you're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting other people.
That's right.
And there's no reason to go through the world hurting yourself, angry all the time. There's things we can get angry about. Paul says, be angry but sin not. You can get angry at things because that kind of keeps you from doing certain bad things.
Yeah.
But when you take your anger and you use that to inflict harm or pain upon another person, it's not doing you any good, and it's not doing anybody else any good.
I want to go ahead and end this into prayer. Do you feel like we covered it well?
I think so. If there's any other questions, please leave your comments, and we'll try to answer as we go along.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing. And matter of fact, we're getting a lot of questions, but a lot of the questions, I remember, a lot of the questions were duplicated or were pretty similar. So I kind of weeded those out, and just leave your comments below. We will try to answer them, you know, on the show here. And if we can't get to them here, we'll try to answer you on the channel side. So why don't you go ahead and bow your heads, and together we will pray. O Lord, hear me praying. Listen to my plea. O God, my King, for I will never pray to anyone but you. Each morning I will look to you in heaven and lay my request before you, praying earnestly. I know you get no pleasure from wickedness and cannot tolerate the slightest sin. Therefore, proud sinners will not survive your searching gaze. You can't hide from God. He knows what you're doing. That's what we learned in Cain and Abel. For how you hate their evil deeds. You will destroy them for their lies. How you abhor all murder and deception. Now I want you to know that I just opened this up and turned to that and started reading, and it had to do with what we're studying today. This happens to me all the time. I mean, I just open the Bible and the Psalm somewhere and I start reading, and it seems like it always has to do with what we're studying.
That's good.
So thank you, Jesus, and thank you for joining us, and we will see you again tomorrow for Genesis chapter 5.
Welcome again to Maranatha Minutes. Today, Janie's behind the camera, working the camera. In a summary, you have a lot of time go past. Adam lived 930 years. Seth lived until the year 1042. Enosh lived until the year 1140. Kenan lived the biblical year 1235. Mahalalel lived till the year 1290. Jared lived till the year 1422. And Enoch walked with God, and God took him away without dying. And he lived until the year 987, until God took him to heaven directly. Methuselah lived until the year of the flood, which was 1656. And Lamech lived until 1651. And Noah lived 2006 And there's like a 350-year period here where he is engaged in building the ark and the aftermath of the flood. And that's the summary of the genealogy from Adam to Noah.